Welcome back to another episode of Right Here in Mass. Joining me today are Cory and Elizabeth Staples, the passionate owners of the Good Dog Spot, a premier pet care company with locations in Chicopee and Northampton, Massachusetts. Founded by Elizabeth in 2007, the business has flourished under their combined leadership, growing to a team of over 40 employees and offering expert grooming, daycare, and boarding services. Welcome to the show, Cory and Elizabeth.
Hi, thanks for having us.
Glad to be here.
Yeah, thanks for being here. For our listeners, their full bio is in the show notes so you can learn more about them and what they do. But I'd love to have you both start off by sharing more about the Good Dog Spot and your background that led you to opening it and where you are today.
Well, I always like to blame my mom a little for that because when I was a kid, she wouldn't let me have a dog. And I did what I thought was the next best thing, and that was I started working with dogs and volunteering, things like that. And then I kind of started, thinking about what I was going to do when I, grew up.
Mhm.
And I got involved with our National Trade Association. I was on the board of directors, and I kind of saw this like off-leash play or more like a turn away from just putting dogs in a kennel run to like let's do what's better for them. Let's give them like more socialization and interaction. And it just seemed like a really cool concept as somebody who really loved dogs. So
Mhm.
that's kind of what got me into it, truthfully. And then I worked a little bit at Mass Mutual while, we kind of wrote up a business plan. I didn't know Cory at that point. Um, and I started off with a friend who's a groomer, and she's still with us. She runs our grooming department in Chicopee, and that's kind of how it started.
Oh my gosh. And so I'm
Yeah.
curious to hear like what led you to one bringing Corey in. Like I know that you met him after you started, but what was that process like? I'm assuming it's because a lot of growth happened. So I'm curious to hear what led to that point to you two both coming together.
Sure. Well, I'll let Cory talk a little bit about his background, but
Hmm.
essentially, we got married, and we were pregnant with our first daughter, and it kind of hit like, oh, like, something's got to change, and what's that going to be? And Cory had a management kind of a background and some skills that were complementary to what we were doing, but not necessarily the same. I mean, it was similar, and there were strengths, but it was very different than where I was coming from. But I think realistically, it was just like, wow, how are we going to do this? And who can you trust? And if you couldn't trust him, I don't know. That's kind of where we ended up.
Yes, I was a foreman for a construction company when we met
Hmm.
in '09, just a couple years after she started the business. And I started doing some work for the business kind of on the side, like if she needed something built or stuff like that. So I started slowly kind of integrated, and then I'd go in
A
there and
busy party day when we
yeah,
needed extra
yeah.
hands
Or
around.
hey, I need somebody to do some reminder calls for grooming. Do you mind popping in? So every
Hmm.
now and then, so I was starting to kind of, get to know the business a little bit, and despite me having a full-time job managing, my own stuff. So, as we started, we got married in 2012, and then we talked about having a family, and it was clear that when she was pregnant with our firstborn daughter, that she was hoping to come back to work pretty seamlessly, but definitely want to take some time away. And we talked about, could the business support or both of our salaries there?
Hmm.
Um, and if I came on in there and started running the day to day and managing the employees. At the time, we had about maybe 12 to 14 employees. Um, so it wasn't daunting. It was pretty manageable. It was just about really learning the insides of the business. Not
Hmm.
just what people should and shouldn't be doing or what. I love dogs, but I've never taken a how to take care of dogs course or anything like that. I was just brought on to kind of manage the people who knew what they were doing,
Yes.
and get to know the financials. So we did that in 2013, a month or so before Grace, our daughter, was born. And then and then it just kind of stuck that way. Elizabeth, kind of
Yeah. Well, can I interrupt
go
you?
ahead.
We bought like a pack and play. We were all set up like for the office, like in our Chicopee location. I just fully thought I was going to bring her in and she would just be with us, and I'd go back to life as it was. And I remember I brought her down there one time. We were changing diapers, and like this little like cobweb of dog hair came flying by. It was like stuck on her. I'm like, yeah, this isn't going to work the way I thought it would. So yeah, we started looking at like what are things that that I could do remotely or wasn't necessarily as needed on the day-to-day piece. And Cory
Mhm.
really kind of took over, whatever was happening on a day-to-day basis.
Yeah.
Yeah, so we kind of grew quickly from that point. We just had the Chicopee location at the time. I think we added employees and got to the point where Elizabeth was doing some stuff from home, but we talked about expanding. just because we were growing, we were outgrowing our business, or the size of the building we had in Chicopee. And, we both were drawing a salary from there. We just felt like, we needed to get maybe a little bit, a second location to kind of, help give us some security and diversify and spread what we were doing,
Mhm.
which is, trying to be, a trustworthy place for people to bring their pets in this area.
Yeah, absolutely. And so I think it's really remarkable that you two went through a few different changes all at once, like having your first daughter and quitting both of your jobs and going all in the business. And so I'd love to hear what that process was like. A lot of our listeners right now are currently juggling a full-time role into business with the goal of taking the business full-time like you two did. So is there any advice that you have of what worked for you during that transition or even something you wish you did differently?
Now that's hard to comment on. Well, I mean, I guess it is and it's not. At the time, when I first started the business, I didn't have, there was nothing to lose, I guess is what I want to say. It's like I went in
Yeah.
there and, I had a job and I worked 40 hours and I grabbed overtime where I could. And I made sure that I was self-sufficient so I wasn't a drain on the business or I wasn't reliant on it in any way. And any money that we were making, we could put back into the business to make sure it was doing what it needed to. So I really feel like that was a key piece for kind of protecting it when it was young, like a baby. I mean, almost on some level.
And because you had a full-time job, she didn't take a paycheck for the first,
Almost 10 years.
Yeah.
Well,
Wow.
almost 10 years.
Yeah,
Sorry.
5 years.
Yeah.
So she was working full-time at Mass Mutual. She would go in the morning to the Good Dog spot, do whatever needed to be done, set it up, go work her full-time job, and then come home and close it down. But she wasn't taking a check for the first 5 years from there, which gave her flexibility to say, okay, make sure the people are paid, and how can we improve? And as we're getting bigger, make improvements that needed to be done to retro the space for dogs.
And with not being there during those like core opening hours, I think it was really apparent early on the need for like strong, solid policies and procedures. Like if it's not just like, oh yeah, sure, we'll take Mrs. Smith's dog and Fluffy can go here or do that. We had to make sure that things worked, and that anybody who was working there, like it wasn't just Elizabeth's daycare and your dog's safe because Elizabeth's there. It was, this is the Good Dog spot. And, whatever happens to dog A is going to happen to dog B, to dog however many down the line. And I think that consistency and, just attention to that, like that focus on procedures is also very important. I don't know that it was, I mean, advice for other people, it's hard to say because the industries are also different. But I think, again, the longer that you can have your business focus on and be a focus on the business and not be a drain from it, not be reliant on it, definitely allows it to grow at a different level. Than if you're also reliant on it and you're working from home and you're doing, all these other pieces to it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and it sounds like from what you two shared that from the start you've really prioritized building out those processes and systems and policies, as you mentioned, to really have that success, especially as you grew. I mean, going from, as you mentioned, Cory, 12 to 14 employees to now 40, that's more than tripling, which is so impressive. And so I can imagine that it was those procedures and documents you set in place that helped you as you've grown along the way.
Yeah, for sure. That's all Elizabeth. She was just really on top of making sure that everything we did, from how we walked the dog out to, to daycare, to how we trained staff, had a place where you could go and see it visually, look up the dog, look up, the instruction, so that everyone was on the same page. There's no gray area. So having key job descriptions for all the employees and all the positions, having all our procedures documented somewhere where, it didn't give people the availability to just do whatever they wanted. They certainly had input into the process that formed the policies and procedures, but once they were there, that this is how we want you to do things and be consistent, especially when you get a second location and you start training a whole new body of staff. Having that set, it just makes it 10 times easier.
Absolutely. And so since opening that second location, how have you two been able to kind of juggle both places? I imagine it's kind of led to having management at both places to help with that. But have you had like any success or tips that you'd share with anyone who might be looking to add on another spot for the business that they have?
Well, I'll let you answer that, but I will say, like, when we had kids, we had our first daughter and then we had our second, and they were like, everybody with kids says, oh, it's like adding three, because now you've got one set of problems, two set of problems, and how they interact. And that certainly was true with the business too. It's more than just saying, okay, we're going to do this over here, and just making it work. It's like having, like having kids on some level.
So it certainly is. So we opened the second location in 2016, right? Fall of 2016. Um, it's tough because we have great managers. We had great setup in Chicopee that allowed me and Elizabeth to spend the time needed in Northampton to get it started.
Mhm.
Um, like she mentioned, Lisa, who she started the business kind of with back in 2007, was there. We have great management structure that knew how to do their job, and it didn't need to be babysitting, and we trusted them. So it allowed us the time to really get Northampton. At first it was, you're just taking in a few dogs a day for daycare. Maybe the grooming schedule's not fixed. So you're trying to build up and really get word of mouth and get some advertising out there to build it up. And it needed ownership presence to make sure that the staff that was there was following procedure because it was all new staff. You're hiring all new people other than one person we brought over. It's almost all new staff that doesn't necessarily know how we do things. So having the ability to be there, trusting that Chicopee was doing okay, and then be there from an ownership level was important. So having key management is absolutely people you can trust to oversee staff is key in my part. That being said, I'm back and forth now, and I always feel like if I spend too much time or in one place, the other place is going to get a little off the rails, and then it's like a constant pendulum. So I do a lot of overseeing staff and meeting with my managers, making sure everything's going okay. But I always feel like if I devote too much staff time and energy to one place, there's going to be things that kind of fall through in the other. So it's always bouncing back and forth. But I think we're in a really good spot now. It allows us to focus on the business instead of just working it every day. Having key management in both locations.
Yeah, and I think that's a great point that you brought up is like having the management in both locations. So that way you're not working in the business, but you're working on the business and having that time and space to have like the bigger picture view. And so that's one thing I'm really interested in hearing more about too is advice you have for hiring. I know that hiring, of course, is such a great way to continue to grow your company and bring in great people to help you do that. But what are some things you've learned along the way with hiring great employees and even some tips you'd give to our listeners here?
Well, so everything changed with COVID. I feel like a lot of people
Mhm.
probably say that to you during these podcasts for a variety of reasons. Um, the most important thing in our business is staying ahead of changes, labor changes, as far as levels, because it's super important in our business in our industry to have proper staff ratios. You need to maintain, the amount of people who are overseeing dogs, the amount of people who are taking care of the boarding dogs that are there. You can't do it short staffed. You have to have adequate staff, or the place gets unsafe, and that's a no-no in our industry. The second you have an unsafe building, you're going to lose your reputation. You're going to lose business. It just you have to keep your ratios up so that the facility is safe.
Well, and the safety of the dogs.
And
And
I mean both. I mean both safety is staff and dogs. So post COVID, it got really hard to bring people back to work. Um, so had a really hard time hiring people, getting them to show up for interviews, getting them to show up for work when they were hired, and it got to like a critical point. So we were meeting with some consulting firms at the time who were trying to help us. And one of the things that we learned was that we had to really optimize our process of hiring. Before I
Mhm.
would bring people into my office, it might take a couple days to get schedules in line.
it felt very relaxed.
Felt
It
very
might
Yep.
take its time.
Yep. And then, all
Yeah.
right, now we always do a working interview because you have to see somebody how they interact with dogs to really get an adequate assessment to see if their resume matches up with their actual experience. So it might be a couple week process from when I first reach out to somebody to them starting. Well, that was like at post COVID. It's like no, the number one thing that they taught us was you have to shorten that to like 3 or 4 days. You really got to expedite it. So we worked with Zoom. We do all our first point interviews with Zoom and then try to get them in within 24 hours for a working interview and then try to make a decision 24 hours after that. So I think shortening that window because it got so competitive, especially in Massachusetts, minimum wage went up, has been going up. And then what happened was everyone started hiring post COVID at huge rates. It changed our whole structure of how we compensated people. So we couldn't waste time, with the hiring process. We just had to shorten the window, get people in, and that really that learning curve post COVID really changed things.
Yeah, definitely. Especially because during the pandemic, so many people got dogs. So I imagine that you were busy, like, so you needed to kind of keep up with all the new clients that were coming in the door, plus bringing on new employees to balance that out.
100%. Like with COVID puppies was an actual thing. So what happened was people were working remotely. They got these COVID puppies because they were home, and then they got called back to work. And then suddenly they were scrambling with dogs that had
Mhm.
never been socialized because they hadn't been out and about, and they had to go back to work. They're not used to being home alone. So we got a lot of calls between,
They weren't used to being in crates. The
nope,
separation anxiety
Oh
was like
yeah.
the destruction was through the
yep.
roof.
Oh my gosh, yeah. And so knowing that you've had such success with two locations, do you think potentially in the future you could add on a third, or do you feel really good with the two that you have right now?
I'll let her answer that one.
Well, it never hurts to dream, right?
Elizabeth likes symmetry, and we have three children. So
It's three locations. I don't really know. We rent both of our locations. When I was just starting out with the good dog, when I was starting off with the general, like I want to do this, it wasn't feasible to buy land and do something. I mean, I would think at
Right.
some point that was always my big picture plan was, you could picture what we do, but on, I don't know, a couple acres of land where the dogs could really get outside and play. And right now there's lots of reasons why it's great to do it the way we do it. It's hygienic. It's easy to control, but sometimes I don't know, the idea of some land and I don't know. I don't want to say bigger, but just being able to do it one more time, maybe building from the ground up. I don't know.
yeah. I don't know. We'd have to hire probably somebody. I don't know if I can do that between three places.
No.
Hey,
When the kids are a little older
yeah.
and they're not, because I do, I don't really work. Like I said, he does the day-to-day stuff, but I do pretty much from home. And my first
Mhm.
thing is that I have the one big blessing we really do have is the flexibility to do, what we
Totally.
want, whether it's with our children or for our children, for, our church involvement. Like it gives us the
Yep.
flexibility to do that stuff. So
And right now, we blow up during the summer because it's our busy season with boarding and everything
Definitely.
like that. So we blow up to maybe 45, 46 employees, and then come down in the fall maybe to 40, 42. A third one puts us over that 50 mark, which then puts us in a whole different level with some of the federal stuff that comes out. So, I think staying under 50 is good unless it was really something enticing. But like Elizabeth said, like we love to find a way to own. We rent both of our places if we could own, either build a different facility and then move it, or one of those two. Owning something would be, I think, our most important next step.
Yeah, and I think that's a good point too. And I didn't even think about this, Corey, but you brought up the point of like once you get past the threshold of the 50 employee mark, like that's totally something to consider. So that's interesting that you mentioned that because it's like reaching a whole new level of growth and
Yeah,
regulations likely that come with it.
yeah, yeah. Right now we're still small, but over that 50, it's a different threshold where all of a sudden you got to require a lot of different things that you have to provide or be responsible for your employees, especially.
Yes, definitely. And so as before we started recording, I know we were talking about how it'll be almost 20 years since you started the Good Dog Spot, Elizabeth, which is so exciting. And so beyond what you've done with adding on a second location and of course growing your employee base exponentially, how else would you say things have changed throughout those past almost 2 decades or where you see yourself now compared to where you were back then?
Well, it's interesting because I think when we started, daycare was such a new concept, and it was just like, wow, dogs need dog friends. They're social. They need to be together. And the idea was that you found the ones that played well, and you put them in a room and they played to the point where they were exhausted, and you sent home exhausted dogs, and that made owners happy because they didn't have to do any work when they got home, and the dogs were tired, and that seemed good. And it seems like again, there's shifts into more of like what's in the dog's best interest, and like I mean. I guess I'm also 20, almost 20 years older, but do you want to go to an 8 hour party all day? And then like, probably not the same as when you were, younger. So I think we're seeing a shift into more of what enriches and enhances the dog's life versus
Mm,
just get them in, get them tired, get them home. So I like to see that. I think that we're definitely following in that kind of a concept, like, all right, maybe Mrs. Smith really needs a place for her dog and that dog doesn't do well with other dogs. How can we, still be the most trusted place for them and their family? So I do see a shift there. Our enhanced program is growing. I know Corey could speak on that. We added a day school element where dogs can come in and we do a little bit of training with them while they're in with us for the day. We have an awesome puppy program, which is something that you don't see very much of, if anything, like it. But we take in dogs that are younger than most, and we provide them a really specialized approach. And I think it's a really great start for any dog, whether they become daycare clients or they're just ready for the world around them. So I like to see us keeping up with some changes in the industry on that level, making sure that we keep their stress and their anxiety, as low as possible. And it's not always possible to make it, perfect for everybody, because even fun stuff can cause a stress kind of relation or reaction in your body. So I don't know. I think that those are big changes that, that I'm proud of. We definitely keep up with a lot of training for our staff. We are members of the trade association for our industry. We're members, we're of the, well, not members, but we're certified through an independent third party, organization for our industry. So I like to think that we really take those things seriously, and that sets us apart, from others as well.
Yeah, just to expound on that, it's hard to believe that 15 years ago, daycare was the new cool thing. And now it's like, it's almost like, oh, you just do regular daycare. Like,
what else do you do?
What else do you do? And it's changed from, from operating the business perspective. Like, you can only charge your clients so much. You can't keep raising rates, but yet the amount we're paying employees keeps going up and up and up.
Right.
So, we had to find creative ways. All right, we have these dogs in the building. How can we do more with them and make a little bit more, and kind of use the same labor? So we've been creative, and Elizabeth's been great. As things change, trying to stay ahead of the trends. That's the key. Is it's not trying not to react after the fact and be like, oh man, no one's coming for daycare anymore. She's been great about like seeing where things are going and kind of like game planning. How can we stay ahead of this? The same thing with boarding. People used to just, I know I did when I was a kid. My parents did. Just bring a dog to a place. They just threw them in an inside-outside run, and that was it for the week.
Yeah.
We certainly did more than that when we started, but now we require that. Hey, you're going to board with us. Great. We love to see your dog, but we're also going to require some level of activity, whether that's they go in daycare or they get one-on-one, or they get special time, that kind of thing. So we require that any dog that boards with us has to have some kind of attention, some kind of out time that's stimulating for the dog.
But it also allows us to see if something's changing. Like, is a dog not eating because they're nervous? Well, that might be different if they're getting one-on-one attention, or is there like a real underlying issue? Our staff's ability to catch things before they turn into big problems because they're interacting with them in the activity packages is pretty great.
Yeah, staying up to date and even ahead of the pet parent needs is key for our business. Yeah. And there's also, as we're kind of on that topic, Massachusetts is in the process of passing Ollie's Law, which is currently we're unregulated. Mass doesn't have any regulations on pretty much anything we do other than having a kennel license to operate. But Ollie's Law is going to change that for all the businesses in the state that operate pet care facilities. And it's going to change things like staff ratios and require, certain things for all the businesses that are operating daycare, boarding, and grooming shops. So that hasn't been finalized yet, but we know that's coming, and we're trying to do what we can to stay ahead of that as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm glad that you two mentioned the enhanced programs that you offer, because I view the pet care industry like as a branch of hospitality. I mean, you're providing an experience for the dogs and therefore their owners as well. And so I think it's great that you really prioritized how you can make it a good experience, because that's, of course, what keeps them coming back and also keeps them referring their friends and family members and whoever to come to you as well.
Right. Well, early on, we did parties like a monthly party, and Halloween was always a big one. And they'd go home and do paw print art. So they'd have, I don't know, a pumpkin with paw prints for eyes and a mouth. And I didn't realize how important or how cool those little things were, because people would take them to work, say, and put them on their desk, or things like that, and be like, hey, what is that? And then as they would explain, oh, my dog did that at daycare. I think that everyone was like, well, wow, I want my dog to do fun stuff like that too. So it's little personalized mementos. Like at Christmas, we do them, but we will take it a step further, maybe frame a piece of their artwork so that they do have, just a little something that goes home that, because for a lot of these people, these dogs are their kids. Whether it's an empty nester whose kids are grown and gone, or, maybe people who have decided not to have children for a variety of reasons. Like, the dogs are really filling huge roles in their lives.
Definitely. And that brings me to the next question I wanted to ask you too, is that for anyone who's listening to this episode who is thinking about starting a business in the pet care industry, what advice would you have for them for being successful?
I'll leave this to Elizabeth, since she's the one who started one.
Well, I think the one thing, and I've said this a lot of times before, but I think that you have to It's more than just loving dogs, if that makes sense. Like, I think everyone who gets into a business, whether you're a hairdresser and you love styling hair, dogs and you love working with dogs, everyone thinks about the thing that they love. And you have to think, would I be willing to do the filing? Am I going to clean up, in our case, the vomit, the urine, the things that
Mhm.
come with taking care of dogs?
Manage employees.
Manage employees. I mean, I didn't take into consideration, you almost need like a therapy or a psychology degree to like, what does this person need? How is that person acting?
How was this
Um, I wasn't prepared to be an electrician or paint walls or, so you have to really like, you have to either be willing to embrace the things that you don't want or you don't like, or willing to learn them or be, financially stable enough to farm them out. So I think that's like always my big piece of advice is like, you love dogs, great. There's a million things you can do with dogs, but do you really love the idea of being in business? And what does that look like for you? Because for me, it meant it wasn't Elizabeth's daycare and I'm taking care of, 20 something dogs a day. It was building a business that, that if I was sick and didn't need, and couldn't be there, or if I was home with my kids, it didn't rely on me, but yet the things that I value and the things that were important to me were still carried out on a day-to-day basis. So I think that would be my one big piece of advice is you can love dogs all day, but make sure you're really willing to tackle the other stuff. And there's a lot of other stuff.
Yeah, that's a great piece of advice because I feel like when starting a business, it's so easy to get caught up in that shiny object syndrome of only thinking about the exciting parts and sometimes thinking that you can skip over all of the tedious or not so fun parts to get to success. But as you shared, it's really important to do the hard work and hustle in order to get to that point where you are gaining more traction and growing and all of that fun stuff.
Yeah.
I think that's why it works well now, because I do the unfun things.
You
Like
complement
manage
each
the
other
employees.
well.
True.
Which I actually like. I do. I like having the different personalities and putting the right people in the right places. Like I do generally love that kind of stuff. And it allows Elizabeth to focus on big picture. Hey, where is this going? Where are the trends going? What can we do to improve? How can we take something like daycare and weave an enhanced program in there and sell it and market it in a way that makes people want to do it. And she's done a great job. And we have.
Well, we go back and forth. I'll come to him with like a crazy idea, like, well, what if we could do this? And he'll be like, well, you'll need to do this, this, and this, and it needs to be, it needs to bring in this amount of money for it to even be worth doing. I'm like, well,
sounds great. But you charge $250 a day for that.
no.
I know. It's so tough to not act on every single idea that comes up, which makes me wonder in this next year, because we're at the time of this recording, we're in July, is there anything new that you're going to be working on or announcing that you can share, or even just any exciting changes coming up?
I don't know that we have anything really new or exciting to share. I mean, I always love the fall, that back to routine, back to like a piece of
Yeah.
consistency. So, I mean, I always love a good, we call it bark to school, where, it's like everyone's getting back in the swing of things. And, I would anticipate us seeing like some increase in our like training options in terms of like right now we call it day school, but we could certainly have plans to expand that into some basic training classes for grooming dogs and again for young puppies and kind of helping pet parents wherever they're at. So
Yeah, I would say, we couldn't really get into training, especially when we just had a Chicopee location, because there's a training business on top of us. So it's
Mm.
kind of an ethical thing to get involved. But now with Northampton, we've been there for, man, it's been that long. It's been there 9 years now. We're just this year starting to get into training. And there's a huge market for it. There's just um, this untapped market for people who want to trust somebody to train their dog. So I think this coming year, getting into that, offering classes in Northampton, offering one-on-one, getting staff maybe educated and certified to do that, identifying key staff that can take this to the next level, I think is a big thing we're looking forward to in this coming 6 to 12 months.
it's good for the pet parents, but it's also good for our staff because a lot of them have an interest and a desire to understand more about dog behavior and training, methodology. So I think, like you said, that'll be good on both ends of our platform.
Yeah, we try to identify people in house, and we generally have a kind of a standing agreement where if you want to go online and take, we have a school that we work with that we trust. If you want to, either become a groomer or if you want to become a trainer, we'll put up the money, to get you there. And as long as you stay with us for a certain amount of time and
Mhm.
complete the course, we can work together and maybe, work on a payment schedule or maybe only pay half of it or stuff like that to try to get people to where they want to go in the field. There's so many, we have a lot of people who come with us and they just want to be kennel attendants or they just start at the bottom. But there's so many avenues they can take it, whether it's, all right, you can make a really good career as a groomer. Some people want to manage people and want to be in management and kind of oversee it. Some people want to, train dogs and work one-on-one with that. So there's so many different ways if you really love dogs and you want a career in the field, getting your foot in the door and then seeing exactly what you like. There's different avenues you can pursue to give everyone kind of what they want.
Totally. And that's exciting to hear that there are so many options for advancement in the industry, that it's not just stagnant, but so many different ways that people can improve and get promoted and all of that stuff.
Yeah, that's important to me too. I know, like when I was in high school, I was like, I want to work with dogs. It was kind of like, well, you could be a groomer. I was like, no, that's not what I'm feeling my calling is. I was like, well, you could do this, and I'm like, no, I don't really think that's it. But there wasn't, the industry has just evolved so much that it is nice to see. I know when I started working just at a local boarding kennel, it's kind of like, you're going to do what? Like, no, I'm not just going to clean up after dogs all day. I'll figure it out. Like, and it's just kind of amazing where it's, how much it's changed and how much room and opportunity there is for for real careers. It's outside of just, cleaning kennel runs.
Yes, absolutely. Now for a fun question. I always love to ask our guests what their favorite local businesses are to support. So I'm curious to hear what yours might be.
I'll let you go ahead first.
Well, of course, I love to support. We have our own special needs dog, and so there's a handful of Right Vibe dog training in West Hampton is somebody who I like to support, and I take classes with my dog there when I can. She's got her Canine Good Citizenship certification through them. Love the Parrot and Bird Emporium out in Feeding Hills. That's kind of my new passion project. I've got a son conure, and I'm working on clicker training and fun stuff out there. I'm really liking them lately. I like going out there and seeing what they're doing. I don't know. What else? What do you like?
Well,
who do you support?
I support. We love our bank, Munson Savings Bank.
Yeah.
Rob down there is great. They've been great to us through the process, through COVID. They really, saved us. So I'm really high on them. I don't know what we like for local restaurants.
No, we don't get out much.
You're too busy.
I don't know.
You love to golf.
I do like
East Mountain Country Club.
East Mountain Country Club gets a lot of our support. Yeah.
Yeah, those are some good options there. Elizabeth and Cory, thank you so much for coming on the podcast. It was so interesting to hear about everything that you've done with the Good Dog Spot. And I'd love to give you the opportunity to share with our listeners where they can find you online in case they'd like to learn more.
You want to go?
Go ahead.
Well, you can find us online at gooddogspot.net. And we also have, sorry, my dog's coming in at the same time. We're on Facebook, Instagram, and I think that's about it.
Yep.
Yeah.
Perfect. And I'll link to those places in the show notes that our listeners can click through and connect with you from there. But thank you so much again for coming on today's show.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
Thanks, Ashley.